getting cranked up here. Let's see what we got. How's that for dramatic, huh? Nothing like a dramatic pause to start a Wednesday morning program. Welcome in, Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. We see you, Anthony and Craig. Good morning, UFAs. Anthony starts us off with. Woo! Rough morning to wake up if you're a South Carolina or Clemson baseball fan. After last home game for Carolina last night, Charlotte comes in 8-3 the final score. Rough road trip for Clemson over to Coastal Carolina 17-2. College baseball is always cranking up this time of year and not headed in the right direction for either one of those programs last night for sure. So how do we put that in the proper perspective? That's what I'd say. That's my main concern, my main objective, my main interest maybe in talking about sports these days. Let's put it in the proper perspective. And impossible to do kind of solo all the time. Give it my best bet, but try to get as many qualified people on here to round out the perspective as possible. And so that's going to lead us into our first guest, as Jason and Colette say good morning this morning. We bring in former Gamecock assistant coach Stuart Lake on the guest line here as he's rocking. Oh, he's rocking his way in today. Good to hear.
Nice.
Stuart, how are you, sir? You're donning the Gamecock hat and still supporting the Gamecocks even after a rough night.
Yeah, there's us as Gamecock fans, and we're never going away. It's certainly not a day you want to jump up and read the headlines, of course, but I like what you're saying. Let's put it all in perspective. And great thing about baseball is you get to play again until you don't. So you want to take advantage of the ones you get right now, and they've got some very important ones in front of them.
All right, get out to a 3-0 lead last night, and then nothing offensively after that. And Charlotte, they look good, and I didn't realize. I haven't been following Charlotte baseball this year, but I look at the RPI today, and Charlotte actually above Carolina in the RPI when it comes to those national numbers. So what do you make of last night, and then what do you make of where the Gamecocks currently sit? I think it's 71 now RPI wise.
Yeah, first I'll touch on Charlotte. You remember last year they won Conference USA, which Old Dominion is, unfortunately, I have to bring up. Came here as a 1 seed, Southern Miss, Louisiana Tech. So, and now this year they're right back in the mix because they went on this tremendous run. I think they've won 16 of their last 18. But Coach Tolman in Middle Tennessee State's in third place this year in Conference USA. They lost a tough one to Vanderbilt last night on the road. But RPI is important until, be honest, that it isn't. And as far as the Gamecocks right now, I don't think RPI is all that important. We're getting to go to Florida, and Florida's 13th in RPI. So just playing on the road is going to pick you up some points in the next few days. But you've really got to be in that top 50. You'd love to be inside the top 40 if you're an at-large team that's trying to build a resume. And now you sweep Florida, I think you'd see yourself jump into the 50s. But I don't think you could get much better RPI than that. The beauty is you get to go to Hoover next week. That's almost a lock. I think it will be probably after Thursday if the right people lose and if you can win. And then you're going to get it. But I think the main hope now is really creating momentum, have a good weekend at Florida, and then go to Hoover and try to, have a magical run there.
Yeah, so somebody hit me up on Twitter and mentioned that Carolina could end up sweeping Florida, could end up winning a bunch of games at the SEC tournament. No doubt that's still out there. But also the other side of the coin is out there too. This is another midweek game against certainly a lesser college baseball program. I get it that Charlotte probably doesn't want to look at it that way, but that's certainly how Gamecock fans look at it. And 10 non-conference losses this year. Now, Stuart, man, that is kind of unheard of around Carolina baseball by and large.
Yeah, I've tried this year. This is my first year I've really had time. And I've tried to learn the RPI, and I've tried to, in my future, if I get to coach again. And I asked a guy the other day that is really well-versed at it. And he said, well, first of all, the RPI rewards you if you win. if you don't win, there's no secret of how to manipulate it. You've got to win. And I tell you, probably one of the smartest guys I've ever heard talk about this was Coach Gary Gilmore, Coastal. I mean, he is a guy who knew years ago he had to figure the RPI out because he was in the Big South. Our conference RPI was terrible. And if you look back on his schedule, and they still do it, they'll play teams from everywhere, and he'll go on the road and do it. And he is a guy that anytime I want to kind of try to figure something out RPI, he's probably my first phone call. And I've talked to him about it. Now Coastal has really set themselves up. You mentioned them with Clemson. I mean, their 2 games this year is unspeakable. I mean, I think it's 30 something to about 7. But Coach Gilmore is the RPI guy that I call when there's ever an issue.
So with that being said, I think we got Coastal Carolina in the top 40 or so. I know these numbers are scrolling at the bottom of the screen right now.
Yeah.
And Vanderbilt, maybe that's what I wanted to point out. So Vanderbilt this year still under 500 in the SEC, and yet number 3 RPI wise, because I think they got 2 non-conference losses. We've seen it through the years kind of vary. I bring up the 2011 season where Carolina didn't drop a midweek game all year long. 2012, go back and play for the national championship again and lose to Francis Marion en route. So you can have both ends of the spectrum. But to me, the pattern of losing 10 games and losing these midweek games. Is this a direct result, you think, of pitching depth or lack thereof for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the pitching depth is a huge part of it. And what pitching does a lot of times to you is it gets your hitters frustrated. You could almost see it last night. I was driving back from Charleston. The first 5 innings, I'm listening to Derek and Tommy, and we've got no hitter going, and we're up 3-0, and you're feeling like you're about to really take control of that game. So in the process of getting out of my truck and getting in my house, it's 8-4, and I'm like, what in the world? How could I have missed that much? And as I've gone back to look, but I then watched the game from that point, and that's what Drew Meyer and I were talking about this morning. And you could just see just all the energy was gone, just from that point on, even though it was a 6th inning when I got to turn it on, it's hard offensively. And that's what I've seen. I got a chance to do a lot of midweek games this year. I got to see them do well. I was the North Carolina game when we put 15 on them, but I also was there when I watched Xavier beat us and Upstate beat us and a few others. And it's just been so up and down, but no doubt the momentum starts on the mound, and midweek wise, really from it felt like week 3 on, there was never a consistent midweek guy that rolled out there for the Gamecocks.
Is that an old school way of thinking of college baseball, that you have that guy, right? And I'm trying to think about these College World Series teams from a while ago. It always seemed like that was kind of the natural process. If you couldn't work your way into the starting rotation as a freshman, then you would get a shot midweek. And if you could earn it there, then you earn your way into the weekend and kind of work your way up. We haven't quite seen that in the last several years, that system or that kind of setup for the Gamecocks. Agreed?
I agree. And I go back to, what I've experienced. Coach Tanner, you can ask any of us that coaches that played, the midweek games, he made them hard. And I don't mean scheduling on us. He didn't say much on weekends. He knew whoever, whether it was Clemson or SEC or whatever we're getting into, once we got into that part. But those midweek games, he made the emphasis to, because our goal was we knew we weren't going to probably win them all. 2000 kind of spoiled us. We thought we were going to win them all when we had that type year. And that's when the momentum of this program took off, because what the players realized from 2000, I felt like they carried it on for a long, long time, was we're not supposed to lose. And we're going to do everything to win. And I always felt until that 27th out or whatever it may be, I always thought we were going to come back and win. We used to joke around. We'd call we're going to snatch one. And we felt until it was over, we were still going to win this game. And that's the momentum of last night that's so hard. You just never felt that energy come back from them last night. Last senior home game, I was praying for Eister to have 4 hits and Cam Tringali and Coyne and Gilreath, all them guys that, have no hitters on that senior night. And it's hard. It's been a hard emotional season for them. It may be a good thing to be on the road to end the year and then to go to Birmingham. So to just kind of have a new environment.
To me, that last night certainly did sum up this season, I think, in a lot of ways, encapsulate maybe the season and frustrations and just not quite being good enough. So as you were talking about it, then Stuart, I guess from a fan perspective, it is okay. Well, how do you avoid this happening moving forward, right? I mean, yeah. I know you were a guy that was in the dugout that would get guys riled up and try to get the energy going, but coaches can only do so much, right? Certainly you got to have players and the whole thing. So as you were talking about that confidence of the program being there and having won a bunch of games in the year 2000 and carrying that over, I guess how much is this also a natural product of not having done that as recently? And to me, it can be as simple as, well, you get used to what you're doing, right? You get used to winning, and if not, it can go the other way too.
Yeah, it's become, and we're all guilty of it in all our lives. Social media has kind of created for all of us a defense mechanism. How we're going to explain our failures. I'm telling you, from those 2000 years, we never talked about it. We were talking about success all the time. When we failed, we were mad. No fan needed to tell us anything. It was mad when the games ended. It was, you just knew it. You wanted to have fun of the winning. And I just remember so many times a word I've tried to make my career on is makeup. And you got to have just that makeup. You're right. All the stuff that I got to do in the dugout, from cheering and running out and all of them shaking around, that's fun. That's just letting them realize, relax. But the players are the key. You can only be as smart as your players in the SEC, and it's in every sport. And, that's that key. They've got to make the mindset on that bus ride to Gainesville this week. Dude, we got to win some games. And we got to get our momentum and our feeling back, as you said, of winning games and not being just, well, that wasn't our day. And the one thing I've stressed to all the players when I was still in the program, there ain't one guy in the SEC that's going to ever feel sorry for South Carolina baseball. We beat them up like for years. I mean, I didn't lose to Vanderbilt. I was 15-0 before I ever lost a game to Vanderbilt. I mean, there's nobody in this league that's going, oh, poor South Carolina, let's let them have a game. They want to keep your head under the water, and nobody's going to let you out from under it except you. You're going to have to fight, kick, and claw to get out from under it, and that's where we're at right now in these final few games.
Speaking of that, so I looked up these RPI numbers this morning. I put a tweet out. I don't know if you saw it or not. You want to guess, if you didn't see it, how many SEC schools right now are in front of Carolina in the RPI?
Well, when I looked the other day, I think it was all of them. Has it changed?
It has. Well, there's one exception out there. You want to guess who that is this year?
Is it Missouri or Mississippi State?
It's the defending national champs in Mississippi State. I think that's a perfect point, right? It emphasizes your point even more. Nobody's feeling sorry for the defending national champs, and they don't get a token invite to the next NCAA tournament, much less a College World Series and the whole thing. And it shows you how amazingly difficult it is in the SEC. And that, to me, Stuart, was always the mind-boggling part about the program that Ray Tanner had built. And he had mentioned this, I think, after the first national championship, how going into 2010, he had some doubt about the team for sure. And he understood the run they had been on and was thinking at some point at the beginning of that season, maybe this is the year that run ends. You mentioned publicly anyway. How the sustained success, how did that happen? And I guess is that too much to ask from a Gamecock fan base, I guess, in 2022 with college baseball having changed and grown? And I had somebody hit me up last night on Twitter and just mentioned how physically impressive the Charlotte lineup looked last night, and especially compared to the Gamecock lineup. And that had a memory trigger immediately. I remember the Charlotte baseball coach, the former one, in a NCAA tournament environment, say right after that game, I think Phil Disher and Justin Smoke were on those teams. It's like,
Yes.
man, who is the Wake coach here? These guys are just at a different level, and to get that response from a fan last night and kind of have that flipped is a bit mind-boggling for me, man.
Yeah, I remember that too. That coach was a guy, Lauren Hibbs, who actually I think was the first coach for Charlotte baseball when they went Division I. And Coach Hibbs is now back out. He's I think like a player development for Wichita State and just got inducted to their Hall of Fame. But he's a guy that for years I would get to see. I played him when I was at Charleston Southern, and he, without hesitation, every time I played him, brought that up. That, boy, that South Carolina team, do you guys practice or just lift weights? And, you know, I would say, because Billy Anderson's been such a big part of his program the whole time, I'd say, Coach, that weight room is where everybody meets. And it still is, but you got to have the guys coming in to meet that look too. I mean, and that was a big deal. But strength in this league is, I used to coach third and just find myself sometime in amazement thinking these are college players. I'm standing here just physically how they look. I remember Jonathan India at Florida thinking this guy could play in the big leagues right now. And he did within like 2 years when he was playing third base for them. But I don't think it's ever too much for Gamecock fans to think we should win. I'm going to be honest. I got booed. I got yelled at, whatever, when I was coaching. You know what? I sit in the stands. I want to yell and boo too when stuff like that happens. I think this is a program my entire life I've listened to win, I've watched win. I've been in the dugout for, you know, since I was 25 years old, almost watching this program win. So I want it to win as well. And I don't think it's ever too much to expect us to win. But you go back to Mississippi State, Chris Lamonis is a good friend of mine, and we've talked. He's checked on me a bunch this fall and spring. They've just had a year too that, as he told me, yes, we lost a lot of talent. But, boy, I didn't realize how much I lost in leadership just in the locker room. He's not a bad coach this year and was a great coach last year. Scott Foxhall is no worse pitching coach this year than he was last year. And, gosh, there are other assistants, a big name right now for maybe the Tulane job that just opened. He's respected as one of the top guys in college baseball. Them guys didn't get dumb all of a sudden. It's about those guys in those uniforms and those guys in that locker room to handling things that, you know, but then it becomes, I remember here, you weren't going to slide anything by the Drew Myers and the Kip Baltonites, Trey Dyson. All them guys held each other accountable. We knew they were. So you've got to make sure you got that back in your locker room too.
Good insight, historical perspective there, and I think it's baseball specific, right? Craig weighs in, says, I was a Muschamp supporter until I wasn't, and it's getting the same with Kingston. I'm just kind of getting tired of hearing him after these losses. Yeah, and I'll say the same thing that I said about that Will Muschamp criticism. I don't think it's the comments necessarily. It's the losing. And no one's going to be a popular coach after losses. That's just the way it is for sure. My question to you, I guess, when you're mentioning expectations there, I feel like Gamecock football fans understand their history very well, and for the most part are relatively reasonable when we're talking about fan bases now, about wins and losses per year and the success of the program. And, man, having seen celebrations at Outback Bowls and then Steve Spurrier come in and say, yeah, there's just a couple of Outback Bowls. You know, it's just a different perspective, right? And I thought with Will Muschamp, they understood the situation. It had gotten bad under Steve Spurrier. 6 wins in the regular season in year one, something to celebrate. 9 wins the next year. Great programs on the rise. And then obviously went the other way. And now you're seeing Shane Beamer try to go through a similar turnaround and to get things keep going on the positive way. So I feel like realistic there. And what I'm hearing from you is, even though it's 2022, Ray Tanner no longer the coach, it's a decade now since the last College World Series appearance, is that the expectation for South Carolina baseball is fair from fans to consistently be one of the top programs in the country.
I do feel that way. I felt that way the entire time I was there. I mean, our goal was, 40 wins, and I knew it was hard. We fell below it and all those last few years, but I know it's hard for them. I mean, they're fighting right now that, trying to get really a winning record, and that's hard to fathom at times when you talk Gamecock baseball, and that's what they're going on the road fighting for this weekend. I think we're 1 game above 500 with 4 games at least left. again, I'm counting that tournament because I really feel like we're going to win one, or Mississippi State may not win any. Mississippi State's got Tennessee, I believe, this weekend. So it's going to be really hard to see those teams catching back up. And then I went through it. I can give you a different perspective. When I went to Ole Miss in 2003, so I'd been at South Carolina. We go to Omaha in 2002. I coached for a year at the College of Charleston under Coach Pulowski. Scott Foxhall is a pitching coach. I get the Ole Miss job. So 04, I'm mad in the dugout late in the year, and Coach Bianco was on me because I thought we should be more fired up to get to our 40th win. And the Ole Miss fans at that point, now they've sure changed because of the success Coach Bianco brought, they were happy as heck that we'd won 35 games. And we even hosted my first year. We got upset at home in a regional. But I just kept pounding, Coach, we got to make 40 our number here too. And we were fortunate enough in my next few years to even reach 50 one time, I believe, 48 or 49 before we got knocked out. But you're right. The fans back then they were just happy when we made the SEC tournament. And I just left a place where they were ready to run us up a flagpole if we hadn't hosted a super regional. And Coach Bianco always, and Dan McDonald was there, always gave me credit that, you know what, you brought a different view in back to our dugout. And Coach Bianco had tremendous success at LSU as a player and a coach. But sometimes you kind of get in an environment, you get comfortable winning 35 games or getting in a regional. No, I want to play at home. That was the one thing Coach Tanner beat in my head as a young coach. You don't want to go on the road until you go to Omaha. Let's play at home, regionals at home, super regionals at home. You're not going to always have success. You're going to run into good teams at that point. But to me, that's the beginning every year. We want to win 40 games. You want to be hosting. And I'm telling you, there is nothing cooler than walking out of that tunnel in Founders Park be packed. We got to enjoy it a little bit at the end of last year. And most of my experience comes from when Sarge Fry was the ultimate home field advantage to play in. That's what I want Gamecock players to get to enjoy in the future again, too. And it's just going to take a lot of hard work to do it.
Certainly Gamecock fans can identify, having been in a bunch of those environments, man, and Founders Park kind of took it to the next level after Sarge Fry Field. You're right. And I think the numbers bear that out. I think it's somewhere around 70% of teams that play at home go on to the College World Series, something like that when you're hosting that super regional round. Might even be higher than that. This is another issue I think right now Gamecock fans are dealing with. Troy says my in-state rankings: Coastal 1, Wofford 2, Charleston 3, Upstate 4, Clemson 5, and the Gamecocks 6. Went through those RPI numbers. Teams in North or South Carolina, Stuart, you want to take a guess at how many are in front of the Gamecocks right now from an RPI perspective?
Well, I know Clemson is 23. I was looking this morning. The Wofford's 30. I have not looked at Upstate, so you'll get me on that one. But, yeah, I mean, what you got on some RPIs in state?
There's 11 if you count North Carolina teams too, right? South Carolina and North Carolina teams. I mean, to have been the number one college baseball program back-to-back years, playing it for a third in the country, right? And now to be where Carolina is, both SEC-wise, knowing that the defending national champs, are actually the only one below them. But I think it's more of the state stuff that is frustrating to those of us who lived in the state and been around the state and the whole to look over, especially the Chad Holbrook connection in College of Charleston and him just sticking it to Clemson the other day. The Coastal Carolina success, sustained success now, seeming year in and year out. You talked about Gary Gilmore. And to see other programs, a Wake Forest and a North Carolina, continue to thrive right now. I think you understand that mindset as well, right? And I guess my question for you from the coaching perspective would be, how do you get that thing back, or how much credit do you give those other programs, while at the same time, I guess, trying to figure out how to get back and competing and get back in front of them, besides the hard work issue that you mentioned?
Well, first and foremost, I think you got to give them credit too, because those programs years ago finally decided to give them resources. Because when we mention a Wofford and Upstate used to share the old Duncan Park. Right. And it was, it had a lot of great history, but it wasn't somewhere historic. You wanted to go.
Yeah, anytime a baseball stadium is called historic, I translate in my head to a dump. It's automatically. If that's the best thing you can say, that it's historic, that means old, and not much more you can say about it.
I've still got to laugh. We went there one year and walked back in their old locker room. And when I say old, Tim, it looked like ghosts from 1930 maybe in there tying their spikes up. And Fox Beyer was one of our coaches. And we walked back out and asked the guy, oh, are y'all like tearing that out to build a new clubhouse? And he was like, where? I was like, oh, never mind. It was like, oh, I hated it. And I'm a spider guy, so I was miserable at that place the whole time.
Wait. You're a spider guy or you're an anti-spider guy?
Anti-spider guy. Yeah, let me make that clear. So Duncan Park was like not one of my places. I just stay out. I'll coach first and third for both teams if that's all right. But I give a lot of credit. I know a lot of the coaches that got in there. But I'm going to tell you what built us all up was what Coach Leggett and what Coach Tanner were doing in this state. As I was that younger coach coming back when I got bid at Charleston Southern, man, they had set the bar so high. And then Coach Tanner took it with the team. And we'd never had a national champion in our state. And when that happened in 2010, AD started realizing, hang on, you can make money with baseball. Baseball can be, quote, your front porch this time of year to your school. And that's when I think the Coastal, Coach Gilmore, they had been winning. Believe me, I was playing them. They were winning them, but they weren't. Their stadium was mediocre at best. They lose that super regional. Remember, they had to go to the Pro Park in 2010 when Christian hit his home run that sent us on to Omaha. And that was when they realized, hey, if we're going to take this serious, let's get a facility. Now, that facility right now, probably one of the most untalked about great stadiums in maybe in the Southeast at Coastal. So those programs have. And then you go back to South Carolina, as I kind of got to come back with Coach Holbrook, and I was here for 4 years with Coach Kingston. It's a different recruiting world because now a lot of those schools are attractive that 20 years ago, no one would have even put in their thought, Coastal South Carolina. Well, that wasn't going to happen. Now you're fighting differently. So God, I wish I knew all the answers. If I did, I'd share them because I want to see us back in Omaha and watching baseball in June too. And we still get to do that. But it's going to take a lot of making sure you got the right makeup in the program with your players. I think of the Blake Coopers and I think of the Michael Ross and just Matt Price, who's going to the Hall of Fame this year. Those guys, boy, they were talented, but they had tremendous makeup. Then you go all the way back to the Derek Urquharts and all those guys. They were talented. All these kids are, but you got to make sure you get that makeup and they love this school like we do. And I always thought that meant something too. When guys really had a picture of themselves in a Gamecock hat when they were about 12 years old. I always knew when we got those guys, all right, you can work this guy because this guy wants to win for this school and that name on the front a lot. And that was always cool to have those guys. That's what Josiah Seitler is. That kid is, to me, the epitome of a guy that wants to be a South Carolina Gamecock and fight so hard. And there are other guys in that locker room with him too like that. So you just got to make sure they're the loudest voice in your locker room. I think that's the best way I can describe it. Make sure those guys that love being a Gamecock are always the loudest voice in the locker room.
Chris hits us up. Facebook Live says it's not the losing, it's the way we're losing. I don't expect to win every single game, but we can show up in these games. I think so. Last night, a good example, right? Up 3-0. You mentioned no hit, cruising. Yeah. And then it's like the switch got flipped, and that was it. You can't whitewash it, Stuart, and say that's always how it is. You saw what happened at Texas A&M, right? You lose an absolute gut-wrenching stomp on your soul kind of 9-0 loss, and then Carolina bounces back the next day, hits 5 home runs, avoids the sweep. You saw the big wins and really impressive wins to start the first 2 games of the Kentucky series, but then not closing that thing out. Trey Dyson was on earlier this week, said that's a game you got to win if you're at this point with South Carolina, where they are from a resume standpoint. I would just say to Chris, I guess, I've never heard fans really be impressed with the way you lose, right? So it happens every now and again in football, right? If you go up against a really talented team and maybe you're a big underdog and you give them a great game and the whole thing, maybe once or twice a season you can say that. But baseball is such a numbers game. You're talking about, Stuart. about the RPI and the whole thing, and how you have to set things up to begin with. Well, the way it's set up for South Carolina, simply being in the SEC, is if you win games, you're going to be one of the best teams in the country. Very simple, right? I mean, that's why even Florida and Vanderbilt just a couple of weeks ago, Carolina was right there in the standings with them. Right
Yep.
there, a game above Florida a couple of weeks ago. Now you've seen Florida go on a bit of a run, and now their RPI just jumped way up. It's in the top 20, I think, right now, 13 or something crazy last night.
13.
Well, they had a walk-off win against Florida State, popped a homer out. But Carolina has kind of gone the other way. So I just say, like, it's the losing, Craig. I mean, Chris, it's not the way that those losses happen, but I understand sometimes it's more acceptable than others. But this team has shown some resolve, some character for sure. But again, 10 non-conference losses is what I'm going to keep coming back to, Stuart. And you mentioned how it's more of a challenge now to recruit to South Carolina than it was a couple of decades ago because of the other programs coming up being more competitive. So what's the answer from there? Because as you were talking, what popped out in my head is that Mark Kingston did not have a familiarity with South Carolina, the recruiting base, when he took the job. But I look across the state, and certainly Clemson fans aren't thrilled about what Monty Lee's done the last several years, and you can't get more South Carolina than Monty Lee, right? So is there an answer there, I guess, moving forward, other than obviously, getting as many good dudes in as possible? How does that happen?
Well, it could be a huge change come this summer. I don't know if it'll happen, but kind of in the talk is the scholarships could change this summer. I mean, there's a lot of talk of having some discussion and making it legal by August 1st of coaching numbers changing. We've said here before that volunteer coach would be kind of gone. You could pay whatever your conference wants to decide. So you could start seeing that change. And baseball scholarships, there's a lot of talk that people think there might be you could do 35, not 35 scholarships, but have 35 guys on scholarship, and whatever your conference and school feels they could do. Where right now, I would be so happy in my life not to say two terms again, 11.7, which is the dumbest, I hate it, and volunteer coach. Let me tell you, from a guy that's been called a volunteer coach, there ain't one damn thing volunteer about it. You're there every day. You're there 7 days a week. There ain't one thing volunteer, and they're not holding a gun to you to be there now. But at the same time, to use that term is so, and I said it to Coach Tanner, probably one of the most insulting things I've ever been called. And I know that goes for other guys that are still called volunteer coaches. Come on. I feel like we should have our socks pulled up and a pair of those coaching shorts on when you say that term. So I say that all in preface to my answer is I think you have to get a blend. I agree. Monty's got a ton of South Carolina guys on his roster. I still think you got to make sure you have a blend of those guys from, all over. I mean, we'll not forget Jackie Bradley was from Virginia. Christian Walker was from Pennsylvania. I mean, there are guys that have been spattered into this program forever. Obviously Florida JUCO was a mainstay, but we were also very big in California. I remember Nate Janowitz on our 2000 team. You start naming guys. We've had a ton of Yaron Peters. Those guys were all California guys. So there's certainly nothing wrong with having other guys in the program. You just want to try to really make sure you get your best guys from the state on your roster, because then it really means something.
What's the sell that has allowed other programs? Is it, hey, we got shiny stuff too? Is it we think it's baseball's important now too?
Well, here's the thing that really changed, and I'm speaking 25 years. You could get a guy to come walk on and sit in our dugout until maybe his junior or senior year before he ever played. And he might not be getting any money, and that was still better than going to Coastal.
Brian Jeffcoat pops in my head. That sound about right to you?
Who's that?
Like Brian Jeffcoat.
Yes. Yeah, a guy like Brian Jeffcoat don't come to South Carolina right now. He'd be going to Coastal and helping them win a championship, or he'd be going to Wofford or College of Charleston. Those programs, I mean, it just back then you could get guys because they wanted to just be a part. Now they do want to play, and they see an opportunity to play, and they see now everyone's basically on TV. That used to be lure. I mean, I remember kids as I was recruiting back in the 90s would say, hey, are any of our games on TV? Yeah, because no one else was beside the SEC and maybe a few ACC. Now with ESPN Plus, I've watched USC Upstate play numerous games this year. I've watched College of Charleston play. All their games are on. Charleston Southern's on. I watched them play PC the other weekend. So now it's equaled. A lot of stuff's caught back up, but that's the difference now. And you have to pay more. Where in the past, maybe you could have got a guy limits for $1,000 at South Carolina or books at South Carolina. Now they're going, well, hey, I can get 12,000 at Wofford. I'm not going, I'm going to go get that. So it's certainly changed, but it can still be the draw. And that's what I want it to still be.
So I was hoping you could, for those of us much less versed in it than you, the volunteer coach designation and the 11.7 scholarships that college baseball's had forever, if you can kind of break those down from us from your expert opinion. And then specifically, so they're talking about adjusting the rules, and this is all part of the larger discussion about NIL and transfer portal and the whole thing with the NCAA, I think, right now.
Yes.
But why don't we start volunteer coach, since that was your designation, your favorite designation. So we call you the volunteer Spider-Man here on the show, Spider Guy.
Yeah.
Roll it all.
Yeah. Well, here's the hard part of it. Unless as a volunteer, you're not allowed to leave campus to recruit. So you could only do things on campus at your facility, camps, those type things.
So let me set it up to begin with how I understand it anyway. You got a head coach.
Yep.
And you got 2 full-time assistants, and that's it. Then you have to go volunteer coach designation, right?
Yes.
And that's for college baseball across the board.
Yeah. Now, when I moved back here in 2017, if you remember, I came back to be player development.
Right.
Well, player development per the NCAA can be a full-time employee.
Right.
So when I moved back up here, I was a full-time state employee, player development. You were paid. What I could not do as player development, I could not have coaching conversations with players. So I couldn't walk up to, whoever at that point, let's say Jonah Bride, and talk to him about a grip or a stance. All I could talk to him about at that time, my eyes are rolling too, was we could go over scouting reports, or he could ask me a question about, his classroom. So it was that position still exists. Mike Current's in that position now. The volunteer, when I came back, was Brian Busher. He could do everything except get paid, which is pretty important. He could not get any insurance from the school. He could not get any benefits. So, it was limited. He couldn't get free basketball tickets or football tickets. It's one of the craziest rules that it's driven me crazy, because you got to realize I was a volunteer in 1998. I did it for those years. When I left from 2002 to 2017, I was a quote full-time assistant or head coach, and it's just ridiculous because you could do everything as a volunteer except get paid, have insurance. You can't leave campus to recruit, and you can't make certain contact as far as initiating phone calls, those type things that you could do. So what they're wanting to do is just do away with all that, and it would be where the SEC could decide you can have 4 paid assistants, or the ACC may decide, you know what, you can only have 3. It's going to be up to conferences, I feel, to decide what you want to do with how you pay.
I've seen this conversation also expand over to football, right? If Alabama wants to have 47 assistant coaches on Nick Saban's staff, and go do it, right? Let the market kind of determines how you're going to spend your money. To me, it's a much more common sense approach. I get it; it's unregulated. I'm an unregulated guy. The name of the show is called Unrestricted Free Agent thing. So, that was a great explanation of the volunteer coach. And as you were talking, it dawned on me: any idea why that was the way it was originally set up? And I'm assuming it's way back in the day, and I get it became antiquated really quick, but any idea why those were put into place? I guess for fairness, so the schools that actually did put some money into baseball weren't going to have too much of an unfair advantage. Was that the point, you think?
That was it. And gosh, even early in my career, sometimes you only had 1 paid assistant, and the other assistants were called GAs or grad assistants, so they were getting their masters. Then it became 2 full-time assistants, and they did away with any graduate assistants. So that was another rule that blew my mind. That so now you can't have a guy in graduate school and you're giving him any money to help him do it. He'd have to do it on his own. He'd have to pay on his own. The only way, and up until, gosh, Tim, maybe 10 years ago, the coach wasn't even legally allowed to pay the volunteer out of camp except for direct instruction he had provided in, say, the youth camp or hitter camp. So now they changed that rule so a coach can decide to give you a percentage of his camp and you get a salary, or they can do whatever they want in that regard with their money. They were telling them what to do with their money. So it's been crazy. The 11.7 was the big Title IX issue that it's been 11.7. I can always remember my whole career. But it used to be you could spread that over whatever you wanted. It could be a kid on $500. It could be a guy on $15,000. And then I'm trying to think of the year. It was around 2010 maybe when they said, no, you can only have 27 players on some form of scholarship. You can only have 35 total players on your rosters. And that's when a lot changed. And that's when a lot of things changed. That's what changed a lot when we look back to where did Coastal and where did Wofford and where did these play? Well, it came a lot more attractive because you couldn't have more than so many on your roster at South Carolina or Clemson. And I was at Charleston Southern at the time. I'll be honest with you, I took full advantage of that. I had some kid, Bobby Ison, who turned out to be a great player. I knew he probably would have been a walk-on at a South Carolina Clemson 5 years earlier and just tried to earn his keep. But those guys didn't want to do that, and they weren't sure they had a place even to do it. I mean, locker rooms only have 35 lockers in it because that's all you can have. Now with COVID, kind of went back a little, hey, you can have a few extra because you got the 6-year guys. So now you can have a roster, maybe of 40. But I'm all for it. And I'm from outside of just asking, I hammer Coach Tanner a lot, of course, but people all over the country think you're going to see this summer the coaching number change, and they feel you're going to see the scholarships, a drastic change happen maybe as early as August 1st this summer.
And net positive result kind of across the board for coaches, players, the health of the game. Did you see any negatives to that?
I can't. I sit, and I'm a pretty realistic person. I'm a guy that made being a volunteer work, so I've always been in a mindset of make it work. I can't find the negative in this. To me, what it's going to do is, and I'm sitting here talking a lot as a dad too, because I know how much my son wants to go on to play at some level of college baseball. I think it's going to open doors back to these guys that have been kind of closed. And I don't think the people that made the rules thought they were closing doors back when they were going 35 roster limit, 27 scholarship. I really don't think they thought they were. They thought they were making it equal. And in turn, they were hurting in our sport a lot of guys because, me and you could probably on one hand count the number of sports in college college athletics that have partial scholarships. It's baseball, softball. I'll be after that. I got to start trying to think who else has it. Volleyball at South Carolina's full. Everybody else has full scholarships and kids are. So it's let's get rid of this. And let's get a little more modern in what we're doing for these kids. And then for coaches, I'm elated to think there's going to be more positions of more people. I know some of the best people that are out of baseball, and I'm one of them because financially it becomes so hard to try to keep figuring it out. I'm so excited what it could do for the future of coaching, and immediately, not in 3-4 years. I just mean immediately how many great people you'll get to see have an opportunity to get back in the game or get in the game. So I'm hoping that this is something that continues to move forward the way they're saying it is.
Would it only be the concern of small schools not being able to compete with the larger budgets? You were the head coach at Charleston Southern. You certainly have that experience.
Well, see, I never felt that Charleston Southern, that it was unfair for South Carolina or whoever, go get in those programs. And I used to say that. My AD would laugh at me, and eventually I did. I said, I'm not going to sit here and hold back, half of our sport for a half that ain't going to put money in either way. They weren't going to put money in. I mean, I was at Charleston Southern with 8 scholarships at one point. They weren't going 11.7 back then. Either way, now they have, and that's why you see things happening so great. I had one paid assistant when I took that job in 2009, and I'm embarrassed to tell you what he was paid. And by the time I left, I had 2 full-time assistants. My volunteer there had to teach. I just told him, go be a teacher. Make a real salary. Come over here. We'll practice late. I'd fought to get lights. That was one of my reasons that I wanted to get lights. We could practice later instead of trying to practice at 1:30, 2 o'clock before it got dark. I could have quality volunteer coaches, and it turned out that I did. And so, no, I'm not one to hold back, a portion of college baseball, because the other portion, they weren't going to spend the money anyway. So let's force them to do it. And I think they will. I think people are realizing you get to come on your campus now 30 sometimes a year with ESPN Plus. I mean, any kid can turn on a game now and see the campus of Charleston Southern or the campus of USC Upstate or College of Charleston. And yeah, they're not seeing the library, but you know what? They weren't worried about that to begin with. They're getting to see your facility. And if you got good announcers, they're telling things about your campus and your city. And it's a free 3-hour plus advertisement for your school. And most ADs have grasped that, and they want to win, and they want to have their name mentioned on these type shows.
Hey man, in this time of year, in a college town like Columbia, there's nothing quite like that energy that you get when you're on a run, when you know things are coming, the opportunity is there. The road to Omaha rolls through Columbia this year. It's going to roll through a lot of typical spots. Nashville for Vanderbilt looks like, with an RPI standpoint, and you can go across the board. Mississippi State being the exception, and I think a great example, along with South Carolina, of you're not guaranteed anything in college baseball these days. Wanted to get to this question from Jan, who wanted to tell you hi, by the way. Can you ask how we went back-to-back almost three-peat while not worrying about launch angles and analytics as much, to launch angles and spin rates being more of a focus now? Just play the game, he says. What sticks out to me is you telling us the other day, Ray Tanner actually was an analytics guy. And maybe not quite in the same way that Jan just presented it, but I feel like this is a consistent refrain or something that Gamecock fans lean on and oversimplify things by saying, well, Ray Tanner was an old school guy. Mark Kingston is not an old school guy. Ray Tanner won championships. Mark Kingston is not. Please tell me, you've been behind the scenes for both of those guys. It ain't that simple, is it?
No, it ain't that simple. They're both baseball guys. I've said this, I think, to you one time on this show already. We had launch angle since the beginning of time. Just no one called it launch angle. I mean, we've all had little league coaches that would say hit a fly ball or you need to hit a ground ball. It become a use of these terms that almost pollutes your mind of thinking. I was watching an SEC game the other night, and a coach I respect came on and said, yeah, we told our hitters this weekend, this guy has a high spin rate. We got to get our swing angle about 3 inches lower. And I'm sitting there going, what are you talking about? I mean, to have heard that from a guy I really love, I'm going, oh my goodness. But, Coach Tanner was an analytics guy in a sense of what was on that stat sheet. He would sit down and find something that you really just hadn't seen. Like, hey, did you realize this guy has 14 wild pitches? Just a number that wild pitches, if you look at a stat sheet, it's way over to the right. Everybody wants to see ERA and runs and earned runs. And he would find some number in there that I remember one year we were going to Mississippi State, and it was Coach Polk may have still been there. Their catcher had an issue throwing the ball back to the pitcher. And he said, look at the errors. This catcher has the most errors I've ever seen on a catcher. Why? So we went, and it was hard to find video, really, but he couldn't throw it back to the catcher. So we put a sign in that weekend that if he did this certain thing from the dugout, it meant he wanted the batter or the runner to take off on the catcher throw back to the pitcher because he lobbed it back. He had, I don't like the word yips, but that's actually what he had. He had figured it out, though, by finding out that a catcher had errors. Because when you really go look at a catcher's line, it's, pass balls are on catchers, but not errors. He had like 7 throwing errors, which was really crazy. So we did use those numbers. I've seen Coach Tanner walk right out with his hands and say, hit a fly ball. We all used to see that. Well, that's launch angle, I guess. So, I mean, he was using it. Exit velo, we just didn't have the technology to know how fast the ball was leaving the bat. I still claim to have been one of the first exit velo guys. I don't know if you know that or not, but a
No,
guy,
let's hear
Brett
it.
Jody, is pitching for South Carolina. I'm the academic guy.
Circa 98? Is that where we are?
98. Yeah, I'm sitting behind home plate with a radar gun, just helping a manager out at the time. And he throws in about a 93-mile-an-hour fastball to trying to think of the hitter for Florida that went on to have a great pro career. But it flashed 93, and as he hit it, it flashed 112 as it left the ballpark. And, sitting back there with some old scouts, and I was like, what was that? And they're like, oh, maybe that was what it was going the other way, because none of us talked exit velo then. So then it became hey, if we can get it going in, let's get it going out. And exit velo became, as we all know it now. But so it's always been a part of the game. The key is not to ever use those words so much that people think that's all you're doing. But I'm telling you, Coach Tanner will grunt and groan when I say it, but he was an analytics guy before anyone I really knew, and he knows it too. He would find those numbers within the numbers, and that was something the rest of my career I've tried to do, is try to find a number in the number that helps you win.
So as you were speaking about that, it kind of dawned on me, everybody learns different. Everybody presents things differently. I think that the greatest in sports can take the information, connect it to the work effort, the focus, the passion they have for it, right? And I think that might be some of what Gamecock fans perceive right now. Ray Tanner could be a pretty fiery guy there in the dugout, and he was pretty famous or infamous, depending how you look at it, on offensive meetings before players would go up to the plate and the whole thing. And you haven't seen that from Mark Kingston. He's been himself. He's more of a laid-back personality. I think at least that's how I perceive it from the outside. What about you? You were there.
Coach Tanner, thank goodness he had that tunnel, and he'll tell you that, because people say, I never saw you get on a player. Well, he always knew how to get on them in the right way. But he was a very in-your-face guy, and he lets you play the game. Coach Kingston's the same way. He lets his guys play the game. But Coach Tanner was probably just a little more of a hit-and-run type guy. It seemed like the meetings are what he's famous for. As soon as I left South Carolina, that would be the first question every coach always wanted to know is, hey, what does Coach Tanner say to those guys when he walks out? And I would laugh, because sometimes it was strategy. You may say, hey, this guy's got a really good curveball, or he's not going to give you this. There were other times he'd go out and say, if you don't put a ball in play right here, you may not get an at-bat for the next 10 days. And it would just be – but his way of saying it worked, because you just knew that you felt like he brought you an edge. And that was the key. I would try to sneak down to those. I got yelled at meetings for trying to get into meetings, because I wanted to hear as a young coach, hey, what is he saying? It was fun. I can tell you a real funny story on Drew Meyer, because Drew's one of my favorite. We're at Mississippi State. Prior to that series, Coach Tanner had said, as small as this park is, we're going to have to play some small ball. We're going to have to bunt. We got to move guys over. And it came a situation for Drew Meyer to get a bunt down. And Coach had a sign for a sack bunt, and he had a sign for a bunt for a hit. Well, he puts the sack bunt sign on. Drew tries to bunt for a hit, and it goes foul. Well, you can start to feel the anger coming out of the dugout, because I was on first and we were behind it. So he puts it on more emphatically the next time, and Drew bunts it foul. Still kind of in between a sack and a bunt for hit, and he bunts it foul, and Coach Tanner is livid in the dugout, yelling at Drew. Drew calls time and calls me down. And I can still hear Coach Tanner yelling, let's go, let's go. And I walk down, and this is classic Drew Meyer. He goes, he won't be mad when I hit this home run. And I kid you not, next pitch, he launches a ball into the right field bleachers, comes around with that big old smile, runs past. He gets in the dugout, and Coach Tanner wears him out. And so as the inning ends, Drew sprints out the short. I have to go in the dugout and get yelled at for being a part of whatever that was you two thought was funny, which I hadn't done anything. And then when Drew came back in that inning, I said, hey, I just got wore out because of you. He said, don't worry. He took me up the tunnel and wore me out too. I thought the home run would have shut him up, but you knew your role. And the great thing about Coach is he was the same dude every day. And that, as a head coach for 8.5 years at Charleston Southern, it's so hard to be. And he'll tell you now, the technology of just the cameras, the social media has made it harder to sometimes just be who you are. But I still think kids buy into guys that are who they are. That's the big thing.
So in conclusion, they're great stories, by the way. I love that Drew Meyer one, especially. The emphasis now on the way the game's played. You had a great line: more knowledge, less wisdom, or maybe not as much wisdom, right?
Yeah.
How do you see just the game being different than it was? Because we all have to evolve. That saying is he's always been the same person kind of thing. That's never made a lot of sense to me, because if you want to grow as a person, you want to get better, you want to be wiser. You never want to just stay the same. So that saying's never made sense to me. And the same way as a coach in a sport, we all see the sport kind of evolving and changing in the whole thing. So I think the question from a fan perspective is, what's the best way to marry the information and the technology and you got the TrackMan there as a hitter, you got all the analytics from a defensive perspective and the whole deal. How do you marry that with, okay, you also have to keep things simple. You got to play with passion. You got to make sure that you're battling every single pitch and out and the whole thing. How do you throw all that together? Or is that just the challenge that is being a coach these days in 2022?
Yeah, it's a part of being a challenge, but it's a cool part of it. And it's the part I miss, to be honest with you, the most, of being there all day long in that building, trying to figure out. There's some guys that need to not practice as much. They're just guys that you figure out, hey, show up at stretch, practice hard, and go lift weights after. There are other guys you want there that the TrackMans and things really do help. Carlos Cortez, I remember when we got TrackMan in 2018, the guy called us that kind of runs the software, and we were all learning. And he said, hey, you got to make sure your guys realize they got to sign out and sign in differently so that you can keep up with their swings, because this one kid's got like 3,000 swings. So I'm assuming other guys are just using his password. So I go down in Stokes, and it was Brady out. Those guys worked their butts off. But I go, hey, y'all make sure, and it was actually Jonah Bride's group, y'all sign out. And they're like, oh, we do. Cortez was taking up to 3,000 swings a week. And we figured it out, and we called him up and said, Carlos, this ain't good for you. You're back. And he looked us right in the eye and he said, that's all I've ever done, Coach. I can't quit. And you know what? That's why he's going to probably be in the big leagues as a hitter in a quick track with the Mets, but then there were other guys that you did have to say, hey, physically, your body can't take it. You got to slow down. Your back's having some issues, or your wrist or your hands. So it was a constant, and it's cool to me of figuring out who needs it. And there are guys that need to get pulled behind the dugout. It works for them. And then there's other guys, if you do it, they're done. I mean, they're in shambles the rest of the game, and so that's the cool part of it. But Coach Tanner, I joke on him when I got there and started in that 96, I was getting to see the program. You had to all wear the same belt to practice, the same practice pants, the same jersey with the same T-shirt, same hat. He would throw kids out of practice, make them go change. Even by 2002, we were wearing shorts and T-shirts at practice and laughing at Clemson, who was so, still militaristic at their practices at Omaha. All that had happened in that short time. Then to go look ahead to the Ray Tanner that won national championships, he'll tell you, he was a completely different guy to the player. He was the same guy to the coaches, and he was still killing himself inside on every loss. Because the one thing, I've said this to you, you were more just relieved when you won. It really wasn't a let's go have a party and jump up and down. You expected to win, but the losses hurt tremendously. I just remember when you lost the game, you didn't want to leave the locker room. And I would not leave until he did. And thank goodness my wife understood it. There'd be games that would end 7:30, like that 4 o'clock Saturday game. If we lost one, I may not get home till 11 o'clock. And it was just because he wanted to sit in there, mope for a while, kind of just stay away, not let anybody else see him. And then he'd start trying to break down, what did we do wrong? Why did we bring this guy in, or why didn't I pinch hit? It may take a couple hours, but I'm going to tell you what, by the time you left, you were ready to go to war the next day. So it was just part of what it was. But thank God we didn't. Coach Tommy used to say, thank God we don't lose much, because we may all be divorced or never get married, was his joke. It was, oh my gosh, I hope it's gets going. But it's just learning, as I joke with what we'd already said, analytics and all. It's like when everybody, I'm gonna really show my age. I remember when I was young enough, we didn't have colored TVs. And then when you got them, everybody wanted one. Well, everyone wanted to use the word launch angle. Everyone wanted to use the word exit velo. And it doesn't mean you got to change who you are. You incorporate it at your pace. And because it's a part of the game. It really is. So Jan's question was a good one. So I want to make sure I didn't come off too much on that, because it is a part of the game. And young hitters now, they come to camp. They didn't want to know your opinion. They asked, Coach, what's my exit velo? That became a big part of camp. Coach, my launch angle is 27. What do you think? Well, I think you're a guy that consistently needs to be 15 to 25, degrees instead of 30. I think you're going to hit too many fly balls. So it's a teaching tool that I've got to use, and I enjoy it. I do not shy away from using it.
It sounds to me like it's just the way to talk to hitters in the 21st century now, as opposed to how I know I was talked to growing up. Hey, you got to hit on top of the ball, which means you got to flatten out the swing, right? It's the same thing. You got to change that angle. It's just a little different. And now you can go and see it, right? And I imagine that's really effective for kids to learn maybe a lot quicker, as opposed to just talking about it and maybe just trying to show them yourself, as opposed to them actually being able to see it.
Well, that's a huge part. To video our hitters, when I started at South Carolina, I used to have to call the audio visual people. They'd come over and set up a tripod, have a camera on that looks like, Channel 10 News, then give us a VCR tape. Now we have kids literally bring their phone to practice, and we can just hold their phone, video them, and say, hey, when you get home, look at these 6 or 7 swings and shoot me back what you think. I can't imagine being a coach right now without video. I really can't. I go hit with my own son. We'll just set the camera up to video swings, because if I tell him his stride is this or his hands are that, he'll just go, no, they're not. I don't have to tell him I show him, and he goes, wow, I didn't realize I strided that far. Or I didn't realize I didn't do this or do that. To me, video has been the greatest change to our game. And at times it'll overwhelm you, but it's become a huge part.
A great example of how you're adjusting to video in the 21st century. Crystal clear video today for you.
Yeah.
As opposed to a couple of weeks ago, we had the internet issues. You have solved it. You've made the adjustment, shown how you evolve in the 21st century. Well done, sir.
Yeah, I actually had a Coach Tanner meeting with our internet guy. So I had to pull him out behind the house, have him come check the connections, just one of those heart-to-heart meetings to let him know it means a lot to both of us that we get our internet going. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. I even changed the angle today to give it a little different background. I still can't match yours, but I'm trying.
Excellent work, man. Appreciate you joining the show and all the insight today on, I know it's a day that anyone attached to the Gamecock baseball program, it's an uncomfortable conversation right now. It's not fun, for sure. It's not one you want to have. And I think we'd all rather be talking about the upcoming regionals, super regionals, and probably a trip back out to Omaha and eating some more steaks. But appreciate all the insight and you hopping on with us today. I know you got to go be a big boy and get in the real world now.
Yeah, I'm going to try. I look forward to it. I hope to get to see you here again soon. And let's hope, still got hope. We got to play well this weekend. And then I'm telling you right now, I'll be locked in next week watching those early morning games from Hoover. So I want to see the Gamecocks in those and see them get to play a few.
Stuart Lake at Stuart_Lake on Twitter. Really appreciate the time again. And man, great stuff as always. And we will definitely get Stuart back on soon to break down the college baseball that's just at its peak. And like he mentioned, we were breaking down the RPI there a lot, right? And I put the tweet out too at Tim Hill UFA. And again, not getting a lot of pleasure from this. This just is mind-boggling to me that the Gamecocks have 12 SEC schools in front of them in an RPI with one regular season series left. And SEC baseball is elite, right? So that's one thing. And Mississippi State being the only school Carolina's in front of is a classic example of that, right? The defending national champs, the worst in the conference right now from an RPI standpoint at 107, I think they dropped to. They've dropped a bunch of games in a row. They finally came back and won one, I think, last night. But the fact that the defending national champs are dead last in their conference this year is just further evidence of how difficult the SEC is. So that's one thing. But then it's that other number that I tweeted out about 11 teams in North or South Carolina in front of South Carolina, the University of South Carolina, from an RPI standpoint in college baseball. That is the mind-boggling part to me, because how many games through the years we've seen just a different class of program with smaller schools, especially even ACC schools. That always used to be part of it too. When you get a regional at home, when South Carolina would get a regional at home, a super regional at home, how consistent the Gamecocks would be at winning those things. I don't think Ray Tanner ever lost one at home, regional or super regional. I guess the super regional to Lafayette back in 2000 being the exception, the notable exception for sure. I think regional, it was undefeated. And then how we've seen that not happen continually with, ACC programs. Virginia came in last year, Old Dominion, obviously winning that thing. South Carolina has gone on the road and won some. The East Carolina ones. To me, that's the separator between clear class elite programs and then really good programs. And now I feel like South Carolina is even there, like supposed to be good, and just hasn't been able to get any kind of sustained success going, that positive momentum. And it is so difficult, and things have changed for sure. I thought what I really take away from talking to Stuart this morning is him saying how fair it is for Gamecock fans to expect to be one of the best baseball programs in the country. And maybe that's just the culture, right? When you have 85 scholarships on a football team and you have one of the smallest states in the country and you're the flagship university, you're at an inherent disadvantage numbers wise, right? Especially you got Georgia right below you that has so many people around the Atlanta area and so many prospects every single year. Florida below you there. They're in your conference, the whole thing. But baseball's different. There's 11.7 scholarships, a great example. Ashley weighing in, just the Bulldogs losing their ace pitcher, Landon Sims, to injury really hurt them. Yeah, and certainly injuries have hurt the Gamecocks this year too. But that gets into, I think, where fans get really frustrated, and logically so, justifiably so, is when coaches continue to point that out. 1 year can be an exception for sure, and can be a good explanation. Like for Mississippi State, they won the national championship last year. You get a pass. Now, if there's another injury that happens next year, well, I think as a fan, you got to say, well, you got to be prepared for that. I understand when star players get hurt, that it changes things significantly, but that seemed to be the culture that Will Muschamp had kind of cultivated around his program, that he would say next man up and the whole thing, but it didn't work that way. You didn't consistently get guys stepping up in meaningful ways and keeping the team at that same level, or maybe even improving things. It was oftentimes the opposite. And when you saw a guy like Michael Roth come out of relative obscurity at the College World Series and take to the moment when it was pretty obvious, I think, to anybody looking at it unbiased, that South Carolina was on its way out, didn't have any pitching left, had to beat a rolling Clemson team 2 times in a row to get to the national championship game, series, and they were in big trouble. And yet he steps up and just shoves it, and really starts his legend. You got to have those difference maker kind of guys, those guys waiting in the wings, and that's what separates the elite programs, right? And what kind of Stuart was talking about, how that used to be what South Carolina baseball was. It wasn't just the top tier guys who were fantastic. It was also guys waiting behind them to get their opportunity. And if it didn't happen this year, they were going to be there waiting the next year. And if it wasn't going to be that same guy, it was going to be a JUCO guy in, or another big time prospect in. And you kept replacing them. We didn't get into it specifically, but a lot of people out there think one of the reasons that the roster limits were put into place in college baseball in general was a program like South Carolina that would bring in a ton of really good baseball players and kind of have them fight it out during fall ball. And those that succeeded would stick around. Those that didn't would leave the program, and it made more of a revolving door around the program, more of like a tryout atmosphere. And I think, as I understood it then when they changed the rule, that was kind of the thought process, that you didn't want to create that in college baseball. That wasn't good for college baseball, and it definitely changed things to some degree, but obviously it wasn't an instant impact to South Carolina when it did happen. It might be more of a challenge now in 2022 than it was before that rule, but clearly other programs have figured out how to still sustain success, keep their program at an elite level. And right now, South Carolina is just not there. And it's a bummer for those of us who love baseball, love college baseball specifically, and have seen these magical runs that the Gamecocks have gone on. And the more I talk about it, the older I feel, I guess, as time continues to pass. I mean, just taking my sons last year to the regional, where South Carolina beat Virginia in the first game there. Stuart Lake is right. Like, and maybe it's not specific to Founders Park, but having been there last year, taking my kids, experienced the whole thing. I think it is just maybe a college baseball thing this time of year, when Major League Baseball is not even to the All-Star break, right? And you get college baseball cranked up with the ultimate competition level. You see guys who are going to play in the big leagues just fighting it out back and forth. And the way that we've been able to watch more of these games, where it would be like one or two super regionals would be aired back in the day, or one or two regionals. And then now you can see almost everything all the time. It's great for a baseball fan for sure. And maybe that much more frustrating for Gamecocks fans specifically to not have it happen, certainly in the way that it used to happen. Again, possibility still there, but really unlikely. And last night, I think, encapsulating that for Gamecock fans, where you get up 3-0 and you're cruising at Charlotte, then all of a sudden it's an 8-3 loss, while the team you're playing that had been struggling as well, and not been at the level, the national championship like level that Florida had been to. Well, they've won some games, and they get a walk-off win against a good Florida State team last night, and take some positive momentum into the weekend, where they're playing at home against the Gamecocks. On paper, doesn't look good. We all know that that doesn't necessarily mean much. And the possibility is still there for Carolina to kind of battle, scratch, and claw its way into the NCAA tournament. But my overarching theme and perspective as we sit here this morning is, on May 18th, having had this conversation for multiple years now, that's not the standard at South Carolina. So that was a lot about college baseball. Appreciate you guys hanging out, and I hope you found a lot of insight from Stuart Lake there. It doesn't just apply to college baseball, but specifically the volunteer assistant is really interesting to hear his perspective on, having been that guy and having been in a technically a different role in development and around a big time program, and then also having gone and been a head coach at a small school in Charleston Southern, and knowing how that athletic department didn't put their resources into the program, those challenges as well, where 11.7 scholarships wasn't even what he was getting, down to 8 scholarships, he said, and 1 paid assistant coach. It's just a little bit behind the curtain in college baseball that has evolved so much for the better. Don't get me wrong, man. I love seeing programs as I'm looking at this RPI list right now. A bunch of SEC schools at the top, ACC schools as well. I did see on Warren Nolan today that the SEC has now supplanted the ACC at number 1 from a conference RPI standing. I'm guessing that will probably kind of maybe go back and forth, or maybe it was that Florida win last night over Florida State that made that change. And I mean, whatever it is, it's really close, right? Both of those leagues are really, really good. The class of the country when it comes to baseball, and typically the postseason kind of bears that out. We'll see what happens here in the next few weeks. But to see, like, Wofford was just at 25 in the RPI, they're at 30. Coastal Carolina at 27 now after the 17-2 win last night against Clemson. See, the College of Charleston certainly still making its case to get an at-large bid if it doesn't win its conference, at 49 right now. And specifically interesting to Gamecock fans with Chad Holbrook being there, their former coach. So college baseball this time of year is fantastic. I recommend, if you haven't latched on to it, to give it a shot. And I think you understand where I'm coming from if you have. You also have the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, both, I guess, down to the Final Four, if you want to look at it like that. Series starting last night, and Miami Heat, I think, is starting to get the credit they deserve. Maybe just because I don't pay attention to the NBA that much. Maybe they do across the board, and I don't pay attention to it because it's not one of my main interests. But 39-14 last night in the third quarter. And Jimmy Butler, man, there are those guys, and we talked about Luka Doncic really asserting his dominance in that Game 7 that the Mavs had in Phoenix, and just completely dismantling the defending Western Conference champs, and him imposing his will when he kind of got extra ticked off at Devin Booker in that series, how that takes him to the next level. To me, the Miami Heat have a chance to go to that next level as an organization, as a pro organization. I always thought Eric Spoelstra was just going to be a LeBron puppet, right? Having never heard his name before, Pat Riley kind of picks him to run the show there when LeBron took his talents down to South Beach, and here we are all these years later, and they're relevant. You got to give the Miami Heat a ton of credit. I'll be interested to see how that series ends up going, if Boston can bounce back. I know Marcus Smart wasn't playing. I saw him and his weird green hair getting into looked like he had on some kind of onesie or some kind of interesting fashion statement last night as he's getting in the huddle late and trying to get on his guys and fire them up and the whole thing. But 39-14 in an NBA quarter in the playoffs in a third quarter, obviously decisive in that Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm excited to watch the Western Conference Finals. Going to be a bit of a struggle with a 9:00 tip, but I'm going to try to plan my activities around that. Actually, it gives me some time to make sure the bedtime's all taken care of as I get older. Maybe I might even appreciate that 9:00 tip, and knowing that should be done by 11:30. Going to gear myself to stay up a little later than usual to watch this series. I'm hoping it will be a series that is ultra competitive every game. That's another reason why I have not enjoyed the NBA like I used to, maybe when I was younger and didn't pay attention, or maybe it was a little different back then. But the game is such a game of runs, and I feel like a series can be a series of runs where you have a bunch of uncompetitive games where one team just has it one night and then they trade off the next game, or maybe they trade off when whoever's at home, and these games are decided by 15 plus points. I can't get into that the way I can get into these hard fought tooth and nail, that Bucks and Celtics series last series, the way the Milwaukee and trying to get back and defend the championship, and Boston clearly just scrappy and giving them all they could handle, and then some. Al Horford with some kind of fountain of youth. That was fantastic. I love that one. So I'm hoping we're going to get to see the best of Luka Doncic and the Mavs go back and forth with Steph and the Warriors, and there's always going to be drama with Draymond Green and Klay Thompson now back, and the Warriors are really interesting to watch at their peak for sure. And I think the Mavs, because of Luka Doncic and what he can be, everything he brings to the table, that one I'm certainly looking forward to much more than the Eastern Conference Finals. And I don't know how much more I'll watch of the Heat and the Celtics, but um, I'm hoping that Mavs and Warriors thing will live up to how it looks on paper, much like we'll transition to golf now. The PGA Championship, the other big headliner this week. And if you guys want a more detailed breakdown from a more qualified voice, check out yesterday's show. And former Gamecock golfer Meredith Taylor was on breaking this thing down with me. But that was right before they put out the groups, and also right before Tiger talked yesterday. And you guys notice, I'll spoil it for you if you didn't listen to Meredith yesterday. I mean, she even used some of the exact language that Tiger used when I was talking to her about the Phil Mickelson situation. The first thing she brought up is almost exactly what Tiger said about being a believer in legacy. And Tiger yesterday earning the headlines across the sports world for his very strong, I'd say, denouncement of how Phil has come off now against this live tour, or for this live tour, and possibly going and playing and not playing in PGA Tour events. But Tiger very firmly in the PGA Tour's camp here, obviously. Now, to me, he lives in a different stratosphere. It's easy for him to come out and make a strong stance and stick with the PGA Tour just because of being the richest athlete on the planet, and obviously having done it through the PGA Tour. So it's a little different, I think, for him. Also, I think it showed the very clear lines, maybe, or clear relationship boundary between Tiger and Phil. Phil had reached out to Tiger, I think, or at least said publicly that he did, when Tiger was going through his latest car accident and rehab and the whole thing. And so someone asked yesterday, has Tiger reached out to Phil? And he very clearly said, no, he has not. And, it's easy to come off as friendly rivals on the golf course a lot of times because it's golf. There's very little conflict involved between you and your playing partner. It's all about you and the course, right? But when you get into an issue like this, where this is kind of a livelihood issue, this is the future of the PGA Tour on the line. The future of pro golf is on the line in a lot of ways, with the competition from this international tour backed by Saudi Arabia money, where Jack Nicklaus came out the other day and said $100 million is what they offered him to be the face of it. $100 million that he turned down. He said no. And he mentioned how he kind of started the PGA Tour, certainly helped it become what it ended up becoming, he and Arnold Palmer, and how he couldn't just do that. I mean, Jack Nicklaus obviously in a very secure financial place as well, where $100 million to him sounds a lot different than maybe $100 million to the rest of us. But I want to be very clear. Phil Mickelson in a very nice financial place as well. Maybe not quite as nice as I thought after seeing that story recently of $40 million in gambling losses from 2010 to 2014. But I thought it was very interesting. I applaud Tiger Woods for coming out and being very clear in his stance. Let me put it that way. In talking about legacy, and I don't know if loyalty was used exactly, but that's how I think it's very easy to get those lines, right? Tiger Woods, pro PGA Tour. Phil Mickelson seems pro this live tour live series that's going to have 8 events and pay big time names, some big time bucks. To me, I like that we're not getting it all one way or the other. I like that there's a difference of opinion there, like there has been a lot through the years between Tiger and Phil, and we can see it play out, man. And these other names on the tour will be very interesting to watch. Ricky Fowler, I think, leaving the door open with his most recent comments about possibly playing on the Live Series as well. These groups in the PGA Championship I don't understand why every golf tournament doesn't do it like this. Some fantastic groups led yesterday announced Tiger, Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth. Spieth playing as well as he has most recently, going for the career Grand Slam here, never won a PGA championship. And then the Rory McIlroy being the absolute superstar that he is, along with Tiger Woods. Couldn't have drawn that up any better. It is going to be mayhem on the golf course. If you guys have ever been to an event where any of these guys have played, you understand the galleries are just different. So first of all, a Tiger gallery is different. Let's start there. But what was it, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago? I guess we got to go pre-COVID, right? 3 years ago, maybe the last time I went to the Masters, and I saw this massive gallery coming, and it reminded me of a Tiger gallery, and it was Rory, maybe 4 years ago. So massively popular. And then you got the Jordan Spieth story of the resurgence winning down at the Heritage several weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and how this golf course seems to fit him. He gets that short game going. Tiger having won there at Rolling Hills in Tulsa back at 2007 PGA Championship. Man, if we could get two of those three guys in contention on Sunday, I think it's going to be a fantastic tournament. We get all three going, obviously, great. But then it's not just that group, right? And that's kind of, I think, was Meredith's main point yesterday, or one of the main things I took away from her, was just how healthy golf is now, how much fun it can be as a fan, how many really good young players are out there, specifically Colin Morikawa, Scotty Scheffler, John Rahm at the top of that list, and all together in a group. Rahm, Scheffler, Morikawa. And if I had to put money on it, I would put my money on that group, those three golfers doing better than the headlining group. Just because Tiger and Rory can be so hot and cold. And Spieth the same way, even though Spieth has been playing, I think, better than those guys going in. And Tiger's kind of in a class of his own, only having been back for the Masters and dealing with the health issue that he obviously looks better and stronger. But I feel like that narrative, there's so much attention on that, right? Even Scheffler saying that, yeah, Tiger's here, so nobody even remember that I'm here. Not quite sure if that was just a really good-natured way of being self-deprecating, or a little bit of that, hey, look at me, guys, I'm feeling Brooks Koepka-ish ignored, and I'm the number one player in the world kind of deal. I'm not sure exactly what that was. I don't know Scotty Scheffler enough. I'm guessing we're going to continue to learn more and more about him if he continues to play anywhere near where he has been playing. But you get those three guys, John Rahm, Scotty Scheffler, and Colin Morikawa, I guess kind of group B compared to Tiger and Spieth and Rory. But I think they're going to, all three of those guys, I wouldn't bet against any three of those guys, I guess is what I'm saying. Then got the South Carolina connection, the Columbia connection with Dustin Johnson playing with Justin Thomas and Patrick Cantlay, another fantastic group. Brooks Koepka, Shane Lowry, and Adam Scott. Xander Schauffele, Hideki Matsuyama, Tony Finau in another group. Victor Hovland, Will Zalatoris, and Cam Smith. Really a young gun kind of group with a bunch of confidence, and I think another fantastic group to keep an eye on as the PGA Championship comes up. But to me, really, the winner in all this is just golf in general. We're talking about the PGA Championship. And Meredith weighing in saying the groupings made the entire golf world faint with excitement. Agreed. And I hope other tournaments take note. Do this. Why wouldn't you do this? And I guess some, especially the big ones, always have the predetermined designation, like what the U.S. Open. They always have the past champ, I think, playing with the amateur champ and the whole thing. I get it. And those traditions are cool. But that's what I like about the PGA Championship, in that compared to stuffy majors where it can be a little bit too much about tradition, or if people are stuck in the past a little bit too much, the PGA Championship to me doesn't have a big reputation. It was always the other major, right? And it was always later. And that was one of the main issues. The other one is that it always goes around, and it got lost in the mix, I think, about golf's story of the year because it was tacked on to the end. The golf story was typically always formed or mainly formed by the time you got to that fourth major, and them moving it up in between the Masters and the US Open, I think capitalizing on all the momentum you get from the Masters, everything that is, I think so smart and really good for the game of golf. And all this stuff that is floating around. I understand PGA Tour under a bit of attack, and this other series is really getting a lot of talk with the Phil Mickelson situation, especially. But I think it's all good for golf if we are talking about it this time of year. It is being talked about for sure. And obviously, Tiger Woods' return back at the Masters and hobbling around the last time we saw him, and now being stronger and having had success at this course, having won there before at a PGA championship. It all sets up for a fantastic 4 days, and I think a fantastic platform for golf to continue to gain popularity, because as we talked about yesterday, this is 25 years after Tiger won his first Masters. And the game of golf in 1997, so much different than how it is as we sit here in 2022. And I think it's so much better in so many ways. It has become more international, younger. Certainly, if I was going to say hipper, but that was going to make me feel about as old as possible. Let's say more attractive to a younger audience, right? More in fashion, more fashionable. Let's put it that way. And I saw a social media post of Woody Austin, what he was wearing when he won the PGA Championship, maybe back around that time, the 4 days. And so, as I say, fashionable, that's what popped in my head. That's how my brain works with the golf fashion, it being what it is. But yeah, these names and where they sit right now, the run Scotty Scheffler's been on. Craig, yeah, and Meredith kind of touched on this yesterday. Many more athletes playing golf these days. Again, we could get into that designation, right? Are they really athletes? To me, it's more of a game of skill kind of deal, because I think, and Tiger kind of proved this, right? When he was as bulked up as he was, I think it actually hurt him. It hurt his golf game because he got injured more, and it wasn't helpful. And we saw a relatively slender and not as muscular guy absolutely smashing the ball and had a big time advantage back in the day. Maybe it's just we feel better about the game, maybe that guys take their health that much more seriously, that they are very professional about their nutrition now. And Dustin Johnson, probably the best example, right? A really athletic guy, naturally gifted guy, but clearly has taken advantage of his athleticism for years and years and years. And I think you got to give a guy like him credit too for staying healthy as he has stayed. And that's the main thing I think about the athleticism, maybe, is a guy like Phil Mickelson, who I don't think of when I think of prototypical athlete, right? But there was no doubt he was hitting it as far as most of the guys last year at the PGA Championship. He was not at 50 years old at a significant athletic disadvantage. And that is the great thing about golf as we sit here in 2022. And I think that's where golfers deserve a bunch of credit. That you can keep a sustained level of athleticism, or keep your physical traits right up with the rest of your competitors, or ideally a little bit of an edge, right? I think that is where golf deserves a lot of credit by and large, and specific golfers, and the Tiger effect. That was the Tiger effect, right? We haven't seen a bunch of dudes go get bulked up and try to mash, right? Koepka's kind of the exception to the rule. Dustin, a more slender guy, and flexibility and shoulder turn, hip turn, using your entire body efficiently is what it's all about in golf, as opposed to just, pumping up the biceps kind of deal. And then staying healthy, because I know Meredith touched on it. She mentioned played some mini tours and got in Q school and played at Carolina. But if you haven't been, oh yeah, DeChambeau. Thank you, Josh. Bryson. A great example of how you can make this live program so much better. Josh, thanks for weighing in on the Facebook Live there about Bryson and him going into this thing. He's another one, I think, where the adding the bulk has also added some complications. What I think that's where he sits as we sit here right now, right? Not quite even sure if he's going to be able to make it through the weekend physically. And so that's where I give the credit to a guy like Dustin Johnson, a more slender guy, but being able to be so physically good, athletically good, being able to hit the ball as far as he does and for as long as he has, and to do it as consistently, because that's where I was getting to on the mini tour thing, that the grind that golf is. What Wesley Bryan, an example, I guess, on the other end of the spectrum, not through any fault of his own that I know of, but having to have dealt with injuries and basically costing him his PGA Tour card, even though he won at the Heritage several years ago. Former Gamecock and Columbia native, now having to battle his way back, and he got in the Monday qualifier in last week's event and hold out on round 1 and round 2 to make the cut, which is just, as I say it, I have to smile and shake my head. It's a ridiculous thing to say. Well, good for him. But I think his journey is more the typical journey, more not average, but more to the norm. I think that most regular human beings, most golfers have gone through, man, the ups and downs. And when you get hurt, it's tough to come back. And then you got to figure out exactly when and how much. And that's where I give a guy like Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, a ton of credit for staying at the massively successful level that they've stayed at. And I do think that's where the athleticism part does come into play in golf, and really hoping those guys play well and we get to see major championship golf at its finest here in the next 4 days. I do love the pace of golf too, how it is different. I've seen the TV times, and there's a bunch of TV times. I guess if you're really a golf nut, you'll go ESPN Plus starting at 10 a.m. I think tomorrow. And I think they're even doing a Manning cast style with my buddy Matt Berry, who is working at ESPN now, and he's on site there in Tulsa. At least was yesterday. Saw him reporting about Tiger's press conference and the whole thing. Well, he's buddies with Michael Collins, is his name. Call him the caddy. He is caddied professionally on the PGA Tour and a golf correspondent for ESPN. I think he and Joe Buck maybe are going to be doing a bit of a Manning cast, like Eli and Peyton, that Monday Night Football style broadcast where the golf's going to be on, but they're going to have other people on and talking about it and the whole thing. And I really think that's where we're headed. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, even because of in 2022, how we all kind of consume things a little differently than we have previously. There's so many more options. Technology is so great. You know, how guys would just pop on from their phones or computers or whatever on with Eli and Peyton Manning. We just got to listen to them talk, see how they see the game. It's fascinating to me. So much more fascinating than the traditional broadcast, with the exception that I'm not kind of personally invested in the game. If I'm personally invested in the matchup, if it's my team, which I don't really have in the NFL, put the Packers and the Panthers on the top of the list there, having been a big Sterling Sharp guy back in the day, coming to the Packers, and then Brett Favre in that era extending that. And I am a fan of watching Aaron Rodgers play for sure. So if it's a really kind of an important game, and I know they haven't done it, I don't think, in the playoff games or anything like that, that's smart. They do it on a Monday night game, which forever has been kind of third tier in a lot of ways. Sunday night game has been the best, and then you usually get a really good game of the week on a Sunday afternoon. And then that Monday night game's kind of been like an afterthought for so many years now. But to be able to have those guys handle it how they've handled it, just be their personalities. First of all, just the difference between Peyton and Eli, having a couple brothers that aren't afraid to go after each other and be self-deprecating and tell some stories and have some fun with football. But then it's why I love having Perry Orth on this show too. Perry has a great perspective, just not taking himself too seriously and having fun, knowing football's fun and coaching now and the whole thing. But that last part about just knowing the X's and O's and coming at it from such an expert, well-qualified opinion, and then still being, or perspective, I should say, but then still being able to come away with a very similar opinion to someone like me that's never played a down of football. Always come at it from the fan perspective. You know, it's kind of like coming to the same conclusion as your doctor, right? Without having near the expertise in biochemistry or being able to read lab results or the whole thing. But maybe if you have the feeling that, hey, I'm not feeling well here, this doesn't feel right or whatever, and then the doctor kind of confirming that, I feel like that's how I feel when I watch the Manning cast. I am fascinated to see how this one will go with golf too, because I don't know if you can pull it off in golf. It's such a long, slow game. There are very few moments where it really grabs you. You gotta. It's much more background noise, I think, background watching than football specifically. Football has the natural breaks where you can talk about a play typically for about 30 seconds before the next one. And golf is just bang, bang, bang from shot to shot to shot. And I don't know if they'll be able to kind of carry those stories, or it'll be interesting to see how that works. But I am looking forward to that. I'm glad they had that as an option coming up over the weekend. And we'll certainly be tuned in and pulling for just a highly competitive golf with names of guys that we know, maybe a mix, right? I want to see a couple of these young guys in the mix, whether it's Morikawa or Zalatoris, Hovland, Cam Smith, whoever it is, people that I don't know as much about, and then those superstars, Rory, Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth. I would love to see Tiger in the mix. I think obviously that would be the greatest thing for golf, right? And especially the irony if Phil Mickelson won last year's PGA Championship and Tiger Woods would win this year. I mean, just the fact that Tiger said he thinks he can win and smiled real big when he was asked about it yesterday. We all win for that, right? The fact that Tiger has even gotten back to this place physically, that's a win. Just the fact that he played at the Masters, a win. And even if you don't like the guy, right? Even if you're one of those Tiger haters, I think you are looking forward to watching him and hating on him. And it's good for golf. I don't consider myself that guy. I don't consider myself a great Tiger fan either. I think I'm more in the middle. But understand how much more interesting he makes golf. And I couldn't even tell you exactly why. He just does. And I think now maybe more than ever. It's definitely a phenomenon. I can understand how you got bored with his dominance maybe, or latched on to it. So I love that this is set up now. I love we have that from the PGA Championship, and I love that we have a possible, on paper, fascinating Western Conference Finals in the NBA, where I got to have some kind of draw to get me interested. It's always this time of year where I'll start to pay a lot more attention to it for sure. And having a possible 7-game series, right? Best of 7-game series with, to me, a guy who is just prime to become the face of the NBA. And I wouldn't have said that before what just happened in that Phoenix Suns series with Luka Doncic, even though he's a fantastic player, right? You got to be more than a fantastic player to be the face of a league. You got to have the personality that comes along with it. You got to have the extra something, the extra killer instinct, I think is what I want to say, for lack of a better word, lack of a better term. And just comparing him to a guy like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant in my mind, that's where I'm going. And to see the the reaction that Doncic had with that Devin Booker little interaction where he took the ball out of his hands, and to hear him say, yeah, everybody talks tough when they're up, to go along with everything physically, 23 years old? And to do it with the Dallas Mavericks roster that is not overly impressive. It's certainly nowhere near what Steph Curry and Klay Thompson have been as a duo, and adding in Draymond Green. Man, I think it could be a really fun series because you got guys that have done it before, been there, done that, and looking to regain their throne, right? Looking to get back on top of the NBA in the Warriors. Then you got the budding superstar, possible face of the league in Luka Doncic and the Mavs. That one is really encouraging. That combined with now the PGA Championship as we roll into the golf second major, college baseball for sure. And again, the SEC, I think the ACC does this as well on the last weekend, moving things up to Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I know Clemson's playing Boston College at home in those days. Coming up tomorrow, Friday and Saturday, to get ahead of those conference tournaments, get you an extra day to rest guys, to get your pitching in order, to make sure it's not unfair. But to kind of bring it back full circle, we talked a lot of college baseball this morning. Those numbers, again, I'll repeat from an RPI standpoint. You see the RPI numbers if you're watching the video version of the show today on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. The RPI numbers there at the bottom, I'll repeat it, man. It is mind-boggling again. 12 SEC schools in front of the Gamecocks. The only school Carolina's in front of right now from an RPI standpoint, the defending national champions in Mississippi State. And then 11 teams in the state of South Carolina or North Carolina that are in front of the Gamecocks from an RPI standpoint. I mean, and these, Davidson is one of those. And it probably won't end up that way, I would imagine, with the Gamecocks playing number 13 Florida here for 3 games. They'll get some credit for just playing them on the road from an RPI standpoint. Pull out one win especially. But give Parker Banks, assistant coach there at Davidson, a bunch of credit. I think they've set a record. I think they're 35-plus wins right now. But their RPI is 64. The Gamecocks sit at 71. Charlotte also jumped the Gamecocks after last night's 8-3 win in Columbia for the 49ers. Campbell is at 58 from an RPI standpoint. And then more, I guess I was going to say more traditional names up there, but you got Wofford sitting there at 30. Certainly not traditional. But I was going to say like Charleston with Chad Holbrook at 49. East Carolina at 29, Coastal Carolina at 27. Seen those programs be really, really good for a long time. And then you got the traditional ACC schools with Clemson and North Carolina at 23 and 22. Wake Forest, a really good baseball program in the last several years, sitting at number 20 in the RPI as we sit here today. Just different than what Gamecock fans are used to and what they've been able to expect and what they should expect. That was the honesty from Stuart Lake, having been in the dugout the last several years, having coached with Mark Kingston for 4 years, having been there with Chad Holbrook as well, having seen the program both from the recent lens and then started in 1996, I think he mentioned, with Ray Tanner coming from NC State, and then he's been to other programs too. He's been to Ole Miss in the interim. He's been a head coach at Charleston Southern, so a tremendous perspective there. Chris says, just found this podcast. Happy to see you back in the game, pun intended. LOL. The other show, not the same. Wasn't the same without dude. No, you do. Thank you, Chris. Glad you found the podcast. Feel free to spread the word. Love for you to subscribe on the YouTube page, especially. You can. Somebody asked me on social media, I think yesterday, when's it going to be up on Apple Podcast? I have no idea. They say it takes a couple of weeks sometimes for Apple to approve the deal, but should have that up and running. I know Spotify has it, the Google Podcasts, all over the place from a podcast platform perspective. But I know Apple Podcasts, where a lot of you do that one. So it's certainly in the process of that happening. But Podbean, by the way, is the way to get this thing live. If you just want the audio version, you don't want to see my face, can't blame you there. You just go with the Podbean. We'll pop it in live on your phone for you, and it's just like live radio would be. Craig says the frustrating part from Gamecock baseball, I think is what he's talking about, seeing better players on these midweek teams. Dude, last night with 4 grand slams. Have we had one all year? Yeah, I know Colin Burgess just hit one, right, against A&M. So at least one. But 4 grand slams is a heck of a run. And had someone else hit me on social media last night just talking about, again, how physical Charlotte looked, how strong. And I was classic Stuart Lake that knew exactly what I was talking about, the former Charlotte coach after a regional one time, just put it out publicly. I remember sitting in the press conference, clear as day right now. Just it was I think it was just like his emotional reaction, a lot like how we all connected to Shane Beamer after the Georgia game this year when he was asked, like, were you disappointed with the performance, or how do you explain not being able to move the ball against the Georgia defense? And he was just like, man, seriously? They had 5 stars all over the place, and he went off on that rant that got a bunch of attention. But it was kind of that from the baseball perspective of just like, it was one of those, like, I think what I translated to be like, we didn't have a chance. That's where the Charlotte coach was coming from. I feel like back in the day, like, these guys are just too big and too strong. Whoever is in charge of the weight program needs a raise, is what he was saying back in the day. And to be on it certainly wasn't that oversimplified and dramatic last night that Charlotte was just that much bigger and stronger than South Carolina and came in and bullied them. But it looked like if you lined them up 1 through 9, that the stronger lineup, those guys were in the Charlotte uniforms. And to have gotten to that place, I think, is the physical example, the physical manifestation maybe of how college baseball has evolved in a lot of ways. And Stuart took us back and gave us a great education on how that came to be with the roster limits and the volunteer assistant coaches still being a thing in college baseball, and possibly going to change real quick right in front of us, and how good that would be for so many guys who have been in that place, so many of his kind of colleagues out there as well. And I'm all for it. Again, unrestricted free agent. You're not going to hear me call for a lot of restrictions when I think the market can bear things out. I think we're conditioned as college sports fans to somehow just only see the game as how it has been presented to us in the past, where no, you got to go to a school for 4 years. And even though those schools never talked about how scholarships were on a 1-year basis and how every single major sport that had that would basically cut players after every single year if they didn't think they would help the program, or if they didn't see them living up to their end of the bargain. But they always expected that 4-year commitment on the other side. And then those coaches, they weren't necessarily going to be there those 4 years either if they saw a better job. So now that has become more equitable, I think it's a good thing for college sports, even if it's going to make it more difficult for us as fans to know exactly who is who, right? Even if that changes the way that your school recruits, and maybe you got to pay more attention to transfer portal and the whole thing. And there's something certainly pure about a guy expressing his loyalty to a school in high school and sticking with that commitment and sticking with that school an entire 4 or 5 year career. No doubt about it. And I mean, I'm a big Cal Ripken guy, right? Played for the Orioles his whole career. Chipper Jones, the Braves, whole career. Love those guys. I think we all do in sports. It helps define things a lot easier, I think, and that's what draws us a lot of times to sports, right? Black and white, you win or lose. Scoreboard's up there. We all see it. It's not nearly as blurry as real life and one political party or the other, or one political expert says this, the other one says the exact opposite. and they have seemingly their own set of facts to back them up. And who the heck do you believe? That's certainly where I found myself a lot here in the last couple of years, especially. One medical expert says one thing, another medical expert says the exact other thing. Both have their own set of facts to back it up. Well, what am I supposed to believe? In sports, we got the winner or loser moving forward. And I think it's what we all love about it. So to see that on the golf course this weekend, this upcoming 4 days, to see that as the NBA, the NHL, I know they had another overtime game in game one of a series last night, been tremendous. So to have these to consume here over the next few weeks, several days for the golf tournament, obviously, a few weeks for the rest of the NHL and the NBA playoffs after having not had them in the same way, certainly with the fans in the stands and everybody being able to be a part of it. That is, I think, fantastic. I have a greater appreciation for it. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you about whatever pops up, either in those games and or series, or who knows what else will pop up here in the coming weeks, as the sports calendar will slow down a little bit after that, but gives us plenty of room to discuss everything that will be college football. And I know we talked about it a couple of days ago about the ACC meetings, mentioning the 3-5-5 scheduling, how it certainly seems logical that the SEC would go 3-6-6 possibly with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. And I had the thought the other day, the news came out that Tennessee and BYU got canceled. They were supposed to open up the college football season. Tennessee was supposed to go over to BYU and make that trip on the road. And because BYU is joining the Big 12 for the 2023 season, they canceled that thing. And now Tennessee's going to play Virginia, I think, in Nashville to kick off that 2023 season. And BYU's got the opening to get a conference game in there. Well, they added BYU and several other teams, including Cincinnati, into the Big 12 because of the announcement that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. But they got this weird interim now set up because officially Texas and Oklahoma set to come to the SEC in 2025. This is because of the TV deal kind of runs up until then, right? And if they try to jet beforehand, they'd have to pay a big price tag. But in this weird 2023 season now, where these new teams are set to come in 2024, so for 2 years, the Big 12 is going to actually go from 10 teams to 14 teams, and it will include Texas and Oklahoma, and they're going to figure out exactly how they do that. To me, man, that is going to be, it just popped up the other day in my head to say, they're really going to do that? The overwhelming thought process was that when the news was announced that Texas and Oklahoma were going to join the SEC, that it wasn't going to make it all the way to 2025. To me, the logical thing would be that it happens in 2023. But as we sit here on May 18th, 2022, it doesn't seem like we're on that track. I wouldn't be shocked. Otherwise, it's going to be so odd. Not that the Big 12 hasn't been odd before or won't continue to be odd moving forward, but to have those 14 teams, including Texas and Oklahoma, for just 2 seasons, and they're going to try to break them up in divisions possibly, or have Texas and Oklahoma involved in that conference for 2 football seasons, and then they'll jump to the SEC. Just the announcement of that game being canceled between Tennessee and BYU, which I don't think a lot of people saw happening, just because of the kind of the prestige for BYU being able to welcome an SEC school with the history like Tennessee in. But that one getting switched for the reason of them joining the 2023 season, and Tennessee being able to parlay that into a pretty good season opener, I think, against an ACC opponent in Virginia. It just certainly cracked the door open in my mind that, hey, maybe this thing's going to speed up a little bit more than it appears now. Maybe we could get Texas and Oklahoma by 2023 in football, which I think would be fantastic. Again, I'm all for that 3-6-6 schedule. Get them in, more teams, more possible road trips. You work out the 3 permanent opponents or the pod system, whatever you want to call it. Sure, they're going to be unhappy schools out there. Sure, it's going to be unfair, but it'll have a way, I think, of working itself out. And I don't think it's going to be wildly unfair, the whole thing. But and I would love to see that happen by 2023, by next football season. Just the possibility of that. I know football schedules are done so far in advance, but you see a game like BYU Tennessee 2023 canceled. Made me think maybe that's what we'll get. Right now, what we're going to try to get here, maybe some closing music. Really appreciate you guys tuning in this morning, checking us out. Really appreciate Stuart Lake being our guest at length. We'll call him the guest co-host today, as he certainly was that, but brought a lot more than just witty banter to bounce off of. Brought a really qualified college baseball opinion in so many ways, and a good day to have that discussion on the program after the last home game of the 2022 season, and where the Gamecock baseball program sits at 26-25 going into Florida this weekend. No closing music going to work for me right now. So we'll have to do the dramatic, dry conclusion of the show. Again, please subscribe to the YouTube page if you haven't done that already. Tell your friends, family, whoever you want to get in on the program. We'll see if I can figure out how to do a YouTube thumbnail on day number 2 of trying that after yesterday's arduous process of trying to figure that out from a old guy trying to work computers, is what I felt like yesterday. Thank you again for joining the show today. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent.